Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Aaron Tries to Record Shit. Today we will be recording something by a friend of mine. This is Journey by Kalua. The sun had sunk behind the horizon some time ago, the dark sky above them illuminated by the moon and stars. In their light, the scales of Khalid's wyvern glittered as if it were covered in diamond dust. As much as he'd love to continue, Khalid knew he was getting tired, and his companions were far less used to traveling on wyvern back than he was. So he turned around to Dorothea and Fernand and pointed down to the ground, signaling them to land. Once they'd shown that they'd seen him, he steered his wyvern down, landing on a thick clearing surrounded by thick forest. Dorothea and Fernand landed not long after, the wind from their wyvern's wings tousling Khalid's hair as he took his own wyvern's bridle and saddle off. The wyvern shook its scales not unlike a dog would shake its fur, then laid down near the edge of the clearing. Dorothea sighed as she looked up at the stars. "Couldn't we have kept going for at least a little while longer?" she asked, clearly fighting down a yawn. "Rest is important if we want to be at our best." At first glance, Ferdinand seemed as energetic as ever, but a little stumble when he swung off his wyvern's back betrayed his fatigue. I know, Dorothea sighed and started taking care of her steed. Dorothea and Fernand's wyverns joined Khalid's at the edge of the clearing once they were free of saddles and bridles. "All right," Khalid said. "I'll go get some wood. You two can rest for a little while until I come back." "Oh, let me accompany you to help," Fernand said and walked over to Khalid. He just shook his head. "I'm pretty sure I can handle it on my own. And didn't you just talk about how important rest was?" Khalid leaned forward to give Fernand a quick kiss on the cheek. "You can take care of the tents if you want to help that badly." "Very well then. The tents will be standing by the time you get back." "Thanks." Khalid grinned and headed to the space between the trees. He hadn't been in this particular forest yet, but he had more than enough experience outdoors to easily find some dry wood. They were quite a bit away from the nearest village, so that the only sounds were the woodland creatures, and the voices of Fernand and Dorothea sounding through the woods behind him. It was strangely peaceful, a bit unfamiliar after the last 5 years, but very welcome. When Khalid returned, Fernand was just finishing with the last tent. He'd put them between two trees at the edge of the clearing, providing them more shelter from wind and rain if the weather changed. Right now, though, it was promising to be a clear and beautiful night. Khalid dropped the firewood and, with Fernand's help, piled some of it for a nice little campfire. "Would you lend us a hand, Dorothea?" Fernand asked, with a nod towards the wood. With just a flick of Dorothea's wrist, the fire ignited. Khalid chuckled. "Remind me to never get on your bad side. I'd hate to end like that." "Better treat me and Ferdy well then, Khalid," Dorothea answered and sat down next to him, leaning against his chest. "I would never dare do anything else." Khalid raised his other arm, inviting Fernand to join them. Once he'd sat down, Khalid rested his head against Fernand's hair, enjoying the soft feeling against his skin. "So, Khalid," Dorothea let her fingers trail over his chest. She still had a slight accent when she tried to pronounce his name, but she was getting better. "When are you going to tell us a bit more about what we should be expecting?" Fernand nodded, his hair tickling Khalid's cheek. "I know you like to be mysterious, but while I've read up on Almarian etiquette, it would be much better to have you explain us what we should be aware of." Khalid grinned. "I could do that, but you're both rather cute when you're trying to get information out of me. Maybe I'll let you wonder a little bit longer." "Come on, Khalid." Dorothea kissed him on the cheek. "I'm sure you'll find other things to tease us about." "Oh, I definitely will," Khalid answered. "But why should I give myself fewer things to do so?" He would talk to them about how to greet his parents beforehand. But it didn't need to be right now, did it? "We have a few more weeks until we reach Elmira, and then some time before we get to the capital. I remember someone saying patience was a virtue nobles should possess." Fernand hesitated. "That may be true, but..." he thought for a moment. While I'll admit part of this is simple curiosity about your family, it is also important for a noble to make a good first impression. And the earlier you tell us about your family, the more time we'll have to prepare and make sure we won't commit any awkward blunders. Khalid shrugged. Try not to worry about that too much. Elmira isn't quite as big on etiquette as Foland is. You two will be fine, I promise. Dorothea clicked her tongue. You won't get to evade us forever, Khalid. We will figure out more about you eventually. Khalid chuckled and pressed a kiss on her hair. Good luck with that. I won't make it too easy for you. A few days later, they spotted a rather big city at the horizon. It wasn't Leicester's capital, but it was one of its bigger cities, a nice change of pace from the woods and small villages they'd flown over before. They landed near the city gates, right by the wyvern stables. Once their steeds were taken care of, they headed inside the walls, strolling through busy streets hand in hand. Some people turned to look at them, either recognizing Khalid or at least wondering why he seemed so familiar, but no one tried to stop them for conversation. Oh, is that an opera? Dorothea squeezed Khalid's fingers and gestured toward a big building at the end of the street. Khalid tilted his head to the side and thought for a moment. I haven't been here in quite a while, but if memory serves, this city has one at least. He smiled at her. Should we go take a look? Ferdinand nodded enthusiastically. With a voice as lovely as Dorothea's, maybe she can get a role. He let go of Khalid's hand so he could make his gestures bigger. It would be a crime to keep a voice this great a secret from this Leicester, wouldn't it? You flatter me, but it might be worth a try. Dorothea looked at Khalid. You said we had as much time as we wanted, didn't you? She grinned at Ferdinand. Ferdy, your voice isn't half bad either. What do you say? Is being an opera singer beneath nobility like you? Or do you want to try getting a part too? A great idea! One or two people turned to look at Ferdinand, prompting him to lower his voice a little bit, but not too much. Let's head there immediately. Khalid laughed. Good luck. I'll be sitting in the audience, fighting off any suitors who try to steal you away from me. With a grin, he gave each of them a kiss. Dorothea and Ferdinand were not only praised during the audition, but really did get roles. A pair of nobles who, after some back and forth, became a couple near the end of the play, remarkably similar to their real relationship. They weren't main characters, but when curtains rose for the first time, Khalid could not take his eyes off them. He couldn't have said what the rest of the opera was about. Dorothea's and Ferdinand's acting was downright mesmerizing, drawing him into the play's world and not letting him go until the curtains fell. Or perhaps he was a little biased towards his partners. Either way, Khalid was the first to stand up in applause once the opera had finished, and the last to stop clapping afterwards. Part of him wanted to rush up and kiss them right then and there, though he at least had the self-restraint to wait until after they'd left the stage and changed back into their everyday clothes. They spent a few weeks in the city, until the opera was done performing this particular play, before they continued their journey. Khalid, of course, did not miss a single performance during that time. The woodlands of Leicester finally made way for Almiran scenery. The trees thinned out, replaced by wide-open steeps. Khalid glanced behind to gauge Ferdinand's and Dorothea's reactions. They looked around with wide eyes, curious what they'd see. It felt strange to come back to the steppes, just as it had felt strange when he'd first come to Leicester's forests, but Khalid loved both the forest and the steppes. It would still take a while until they reached the capital, and none of them wanted to hurry. It had been a long time since Khalid had been here, and for the others it was all the first time so far away from home at all. All of them wanted to enjoy the scenery, take the time to see what Elmira had to offer. In the distance, Khalid spotted some cliffs. If memory served, it had been the place for a popular test of courage when he'd been a child. It wasn't exactly scary now, but back then everyone had wanted to prove their bravery this way. Khalid gestured to Dorothea and Ferdinand to follow before he steered his wyvern straight to the cliffs, and down between them. Steep, jagged rocks rose to each side, and he couldn't see it, but Khalid knew there was a river running right by the edge, following the cliff until a sharp drop turned into a waterfall. The cliffs soon met, turning the gorge into a dark tunnel. The light was dim, but the tunnel was more than wide enough to fly in safely, though as a child that had been a much harder to estimate. Only a few moments later, Khalid could hear the waterfall, its force nearly shaking the tunnel. Khalid leaned forward, ducking close to his wyvern's neck just before he broke through the water. He felt its pressure for a second, then he and his wyvern were free, droplets spraying all around them. Shortly behind him, Dorothea followed, and then Ferdinand. Khalid grinned and motioned for them all to land a bit further ahead, where the river slowed again to a steady stream. Khalid brushed some wet hair out of his face. "Congratulations! Almiran children would now call you brave." Dorothea had just started wringing out her hair when her wyvern shook its scales to dry itself off. Dorothea only shot it a mildly annoyed look before she turned to face Khalid. "You could have warned us, you know." "My apologies. I thought a beautiful flower such as you would enjoy a little water," Khalid answered, his grin showing exactly how sorry he was. Dorothea smiled. "Charm won't get you out of everything, Khalid." I trembled in fear. Khalid gave her a mocking bow and looked at Ferdinand. "And what's nobility take on this?" "Well, were we in Folan, a warning would have indeed been proper," Ferdinand answered. Even soaking wet, he managed to look regal. Impressive. "But I have to admit that I don't know enough about Almiran customs to make a judgment on that." Khalid laughed. "Well, let me assure you, in Almiran, this would probably have a rather mean-spirited prank as its consequence. Though I'd hope pranks would be beneath Faldland's nobility." "The nobility, maybe," Dorothea answered, laying a hand on Khalid's shoulder. "But perhaps you should remember that I am not a noble, and pranks are definitely not beneath me." She gave Khalid a quick kiss on the cheek. "Oh, you think you can catch me off guard?" He chuckled, raising an eyebrow. "This should be interesting." "Oh, I don't think so. I know I can." She glanced at Ferdinand. "You'll help me, won't you?" Khalid turned around. "But I thought pranks were beneath a noble." "Under ordinary circumstances, perhaps. But if, as you said, it is the expected etiquette, Almira, well, it would only be proper to prank you back, would it not?" "Oh my." Khalid looked up from one to the other. "Guess I should sleep with one eye open from now on." He took Ferdinand's hand and pulled him in for a quick kiss. The final step of their journey was Almira's capital. They landed their wyverns right in front of the castle, something only the highest-ranking Almirans would dare, but nobody would stop Khalid and his entourage. "We'll take care of them ourselves, thank you," Khalid informed the servants who came to take his wyvern's reins from him. Then he gestured to Dorothea and Ferdinand to follow him to the stables. The three of them moved in sync. Khalid had more experience taking care of wyverns, but Dorothea and Ferdinand had learned a lot during their travels. They were the only people there, though some of the other wyverns eyed them curiously. "Is it common in Almira for everyone to care for their own steed?" Ferdinand gently slid the bridle off his wyvern's snout and took a moment to stroke its nostrils. "Not really," Khalid shrugged as he lifted the saddle off his wyvern and onto the box door. "But I prefer to do it myself, and figured you two might like the chance to ask some last-minute questions." Dorothea's wyvern shook its scales when she removed the saddle, causing her to take a startled step back. "Didn't you say we shouldn't think about it too much?" "Well, there's a difference between not overthinking and not thinking at all. Though sometimes I wonder if my father knows the difference, to be quite honest," Khalid answered, with a grin. Then gestured toward a small chamber. "You can put the tack over there, just remember which one's yours." "May I?" Ferdinand, already carrying his own wyvern gear, gestured towards Dorothea's saddle and bridle. "Oh, what a gentleman. Maybe Khalid can learn from you some day." Dorothea dropped her tack on top of Ferdinand's. Khalid looked from one to the other. "Well, it doesn't really look like there are too many advantages to being a gentleman," he answered with a grin. My affection doesn't count as an advantage. Dorothea raised her eyebrows, pretending to pout. If you put it that way, Khalid walked over to her and pressed a kiss on her cheek. Maybe I'll learn just a little bit. Ferdinand returned, after stowing their wyvern's gear in the side chamber. You are a noble, after all, so it would only be proper if you learned. All right, later. For now, you two will have to get used to Almyran nobility for a change. Khalid stowed his wyvern's gear in the chamber and ran his hand over the wyvern's snout one more time before he turned away. Well then, are you ready? I was born ready, Dorothea answered, though her voice was a little shaky. Ferdinand seemed to notice. He took her hand and squeezed it gently. Well, it won't be the first time that I, Ferdinand von Eger, have introduced myself to even higher nobility than myself. I'm certain we'll be able to make a good first impression. All right, then, Khalid chuckled. Time to introduce you. Come with me.